Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito is in the news again, and again, not in a good way, for flying an American flag upside down outside his home after January 6th. This is a guy who's supposed to be apolitical, who's not supposed to participate in partisan political activity, and he keeps stepping in it over and over again. Let's discuss. I'm Dave Aronberg, State Attorney for Palm Beach County, aka the Florida Lawman, here on the MeidasTouch Network. Thank you for all your views and your likes and your comments. I love reading them, even when you disagree with me. Please keep them coming. So Samuel Alito first came onto the scene in the public's eye when he was up front at President Obama's State of the Union speech. And when President Obama decided to take a shot at the Supreme Court, Alito, who's supposed to sit there stone-faced because they're supposed to be above politics, he shook his head.
Including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections. Including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections. Including foreign corporations, to spend without limit.
Because they're supposed to interpret the law. They're not supposed to be partisan actors. And yeah, I know, we've seen a lot of that recently. But boy, that was quaint when we all got upset at him for shaking his head during the State of the Union speech. Well, look at him now. It turns out we are just finding out now, which is another story. I don't know why it took so long for us to find out now, that after January 6th, he hung the American flag in a way that shows distress. Now, he says that it's his wife's fault. He's throwing his wife under the bus, saying that she's the one who hung it because her neighbor called her a really nasty word. Why then hang it upside down? If your neighbor is a liberal and challenging you and your political views, maybe fly the American flag in your attempt to display a patriotism, but why do it upside down? And unfortunately, when it comes to the Supreme Court, they're the ones who create their own rules and interpret their own rules because they're the highest court in the land and they wear the black robes and they don't allow cameras in the courtroom. So they set their own rules, they enforce their own rules, and they do what they want. And you wonder why Chief Justice John Roberts is so upset that there is a crisis of confidence in the court. Well, look in the mirror, dude. The reason why people have lost faith in the Supreme Court is because you have stuff like this going on. You have Clarence Thomas's wife participating in the attempted insurrection, and yet Justice Thomas still sits on January 6th related cases. And Justice Alito sits on them too. They're not going to recuse themselves. Don't expect them to. And don't expect Chief Justice Roberts, who has been complaining about the poor perception of the court amongst the public, don't expect him to do anything about it either. The only thing you can really do about it is you elect a president who's going to appoint different justices. Because if Trump gets back in the White House, these justices are going to start retiring. The conservative ones, knowing that they'll be replaced by another younger conservative. So the real issue with Justice Alito's wife flying the flag upside down is that it's not only a sign of distress, but it was used and co-opted by Trump supporters to symbolize the Stop the Steal movement. And this was flown after and during and before January 6th. And here is Supreme Court Justice who's ruling on issues like presidential immunity and actually on the election itself in 2020. He's making decisions, and his house is flying a flag that's consistent with the way the rioters were flying the flag. According to the New York Times, while the flag was up, the court was still contending with whether to hear a 2020 election case, with Justice Alito on the losing end of that decision. In coming weeks, the justices will rule on two climactic cases involving the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, including whether Mr. Trump has immunity for his actions. Their decisions will shape how accountable he can be held for trying to overturn the last presidential election and his chances for re-election in the upcoming one. Quote, "I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag," Justice Alito said in an emailed statement to the Times. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs. Judicial experts said in interviews that the flag was a clear violation of ethics rules, which seek to avoid even the appearance of bias and can sow doubt about Justice Alito's impartiality in cases related to the election and the Capitol riot. The long-standing ethics code for the lower courts, as well as the recent one adopted by the Supreme Court, stresses the need for judges to remain independent and avoid political statements or opinions on matters that could come before them. Yeah, that's a toothless rule that the justices themselves enforce and are interpreted by the justices themselves. And that's why you need something stronger, and you need the Chief Justice to step in, and you need Justice Thomas and Justice Alito to recuse themselves from these cases, January 6th related cases, and the one on presidential immunity, which has a direct impact on the election interference case in Washington, D.C., related to January 6th. And that's why you see people so outraged by the fact that the Supreme Court decided to step in and put a pause on the one federal case that had a chance to go before the election, the January 6th case in Washington, D.C. How do you think this looks now? That now we're finding out that Justice Alito's home showed a flag in the manner of the Stop the Steal movement. Well, it doesn't look good. And that's why people are outraged. And now we're supposed to hope now that the Supreme Court actually gives the green light that allows the DC election interference case to happen before the election. But if it does not do that, and I think it's unlikely that case is going to be heard before the election, although not impossible, there's still a possibility. But if the Supreme Court decides to delay the matter any further, then it essentially is granting Trump the immunity that he seeks without ruling that way, because then Trump can escape the trial before the election and then in his mind become president. And then if he wins, he will call off the dogs. He will tell his attorney general to drop everything. So in essence, he's getting the immunity that he's seeking by having the Supreme Court just deliberate and deliberate and deliberate. According to the New York Times, the court has also repeatedly warned its own employees against public displays of partisan views. According to guidelines circulated to the staff and reviewed by the Times, that's its own employees. Do the Supreme Court justices count for that? Well, they'll make up their own minds. Displaying signs or bumper stickers is not permitted according to the court's internal rule book and a 2022 memo reiterating the ban on political activity. Yeah. Asked if these rules apply to justices, the court declined to respond. And the New York Times article concludes, if Justice Alito were on another court, the flag could also trigger some sort of review to determine if there was any misconduct. But because the Supreme Court serves as the arbiter of its own behavior, you don't really have anywhere to take it, he says. Hence the frustration for all of us. Well, this story isn't going away. And if the Supreme Court continues to rule the way it's ruling, continue to go down that road to look like it's covering for Donald Trump, it's going to lose even more credibility with the American people. Remember, Justice Alito is the one who wrote the Dobbs opinion, the one that overturned 50 years of precedent of Roe versus Wade. He's the one who, according to some reports, he or his clerks leaked the opinion to try to make sure that the wavering justices, perhaps the Kavanaughs of the world, would stay firm because now they're being locked in. The public would see that there was enough votes to overturn Roe versus Wade, and the constituency groups would start calling. And that's according to one theory that it was leaked by Alito himself to make sure that he had the 5-4 majority that he had in the initial preliminary opinion, that the conservative justices on his side would not waver. So you have a Supreme Court justice here who has a history of acting in a way that justices generally are not supposed to act, acting political, acting in a way that overturns precedent of 50 years, which he's allowed to do. But you're talking about a justice when combined with his outward political views, with questionable ethical activity, also about trips he's taken on others' dimes where he's really not totally allowed to do so, but because of the squishy ethics rules of the Supreme Court, he does it. Now you have this issue with the flag flown upside down, which didn't come out until now. And now, as his defense, he's throwing his wife under the bus. Yeah. And in that way, he's like Clarence Thomas. Just blame your wife and continue to do what you want to do, which is consistent with the way your wife would want you to vote and act. So that's where we are. I wish I had better news for you about the Supreme Court, but this story is really distressing and depressing, and it just shows you that this coming election is even more important than people realize. I'm Dave Aronberg, aka the Florida Lawman. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it and leave a comment below. I'm here on the MeidasTouch Network, and I'll see you next time.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.